Well, I was in the mood to watch a movie about the Titanic. No, not the My Heart Will Go On Titanic movie, but rather the exciting 1953 Titanic film starring Clifton Webb and Barbara Stanwyck, who are passengers on board the doomed RMS Titanic. I really enjoyed this one, and I'll give a summary of the film, spoiler free. Well, you already kind of know how it ends. And then I'll offer some film details and closing thoughts. So the film opens up with scenes of an iceberg crumbling apart in the ocean with some dramatic and somewhat sinister Saul Kaplan music. Foreshadowing. And then we see the Titanic getting ready to sail. Now gifts are being sent to the various travelers for a happy maiden voyage. Now the captain and his crew are all getting ready, and Captain Edward Smith, played here by Brian Ahern, hoists an old flag that was gifted to him. This is a flag from his first duty 40-some years ago. And then we cut over to the character of Julia Sturgis, played by Barbara Stanwyck. Now she's coming on board the Titanic with her kids. We have Annette, played by Audrey Dalton, and Norman, played by Harper Carter. Now, they are traveling to America, but they are not traveling with her husband. She's looking perhaps a little anxious, like she's trying to run away, but we will find out more about that as the film unfolds. Well, we cut over to a gentleman who is apparently boarding last minute. It's the character of Richard Sturgis, played here by Clifton Webb. Now, he wants to board, but he can't because the Titanic has been sold out. So he finds a poor immigrant family that's trying to board, and he bribes them for one of their tickets, paying them a lot of money so that he can get on, and he does so and gets into the steerage class. And he's able to kind of just blend in with the crowds to get on board the Titanic. Now, a little bit later, at a fancy ballroom, Richard arrives and he finds his family dining, and they all seem surprised to see him. But Julia, who is his wife, is not amused. Now, the kids all leave, and we see that Richard and Julia just aren't getting along. He says things like, "Why are you kidnapping my children?" She wants for them to have a real upbringing, so she's sneaking them off to America, to Mackinac Island, Michigan, because that's where you have a more normal, down-to-earth life. Mackinac Island, I guess. Well, at the telegraph room, we see the character of George, played by Richard Basehart. Now, he arrives to send a wire home to his family, but he is seemingly very drunk and he's unable to phrase the message, so he leaves and tries to get into the ship's bar, which apparently isn't open yet. So, wonder what his story is. Now, meanwhile, we are introduced to some Purdue students, and we meet Giff Rogers, played here by a very young Robert Wagner. Now, he is interested in the character of Annette because, she's cute, and he spots her mother alone and goes to strike up a conversation with her, being all friendly with hopes that maybe she will allow for him to meet her daughter. Well, Julia seems amused by this silly fellow and his efforts. Now, the next day, there's some squabbling in the cabin as Richard tells the kids that instead of being a family reunion that Julia is taking them to, she's actually taking them away and keeping them in America. Now, Annette, like her father, is a little on the snobby side, and she likes the international lifestyle. Well, at a fancy ballroom later, Giff gets his dance with Annette, and Richard goes and meets privately with Julia, who tells him the whole story about long ago, how she had had a fling with some guy at the beach, and that is where their son Norman came from. Now, he takes it all in, and then he tells her that now he wants nothing to do with Norman. Well, he's really kind of a cold, stoic jerk. Now, later we see him. He's watching Norman sleeping. He's kind of thinking about it all, and he sees that Norman has even left a note about how he's looking forward to, the next day of playing shuffleboard with his dad. So Richard goes off, plays some cards, and Julia heads up to the deck, and here she finds George, and he's drunk out of his mind. He's looking up at the stars. So she helps bring him back to his room and offers to get the doctor for him, but he refuses. So while getting some spirits of ammonia for him, she spots in his bags a Bible. Now, she's about to leave, but he talks to her about he was a priest, and he had been struggling with alcohol and lost his job, that he would lean on a little Hennessy, and now he's struggling, that he has to tell his family back home that he's been kicked out of his priestly role. Well, one of the officers goes to find the captain, finds him at a worship service on the ship, tells him that there was an iceberg warning that was received. He's also a little concerned about their speed, but the captain tells him that they are out of range of the iceberg, so no worries. So about 53 minutes into the film so far, and we get our first mention of that iceberg. Now we see the cleaning crew cleaning up after the card game that's been taking place, and man, that's a lot of ciggies and coffee. I don't know, maybe Bogart showed up for a few hands, but anyhow, Richard, we can see, has clearly been throwing himself into playing a lot of cards and staying away from his family. Norman shows up for the shuffleboard game, but Richard just gives him the cold shoulder that he's not interested in playing anymore. Now, he's playing here with the character of Maud Young, who is this wealthy socialite who is clearly based on the real-life character, the unsinkable Molly Brown. She is excellently played here by Thelma Ritter. I really like her just kind of funny, edgy character in this film. And, she can pick up on the vibe that something's wrong with this Richard guy based on his cold reaction to Norman. But he keeps on with his card playing. Well, up on the deck, Giff talks with Annette and teaches her the Navajo rag dance, to which his buddies watch and applaud. And now that she's danced with him, she asks if they can go to another dance together later, and he's thrilled, and he tosses his hat into the air. It lands in the ocean, where small chunks of ice float past. Now Richard takes a break from his card playing, and he goes to shave. And there is Julia, his wife, pleading for him to come back and spend some time with his son. But he is just stubborn and refuses. Now, around this time, the telegraph department figures out that there was a mix-up, and they were not signaled properly about an iceberg warning. So the captain reviews the reports, he checks the map to track it, and he determines there's no danger based on their location, and he calls it a night. But he promises to watch for any icebergs in the morning. And then he goes to listen to a nice sing-along at the piano. Now Giff and Annette sneak off, and he gives her a smooch. Meanwhile, the night bridge crew, they look, and finally, at the 1 hour, 7-minute mark of the film, the iceberg makes its appearance. And we see the Titanic drift past the ice, and you think, maybe, will it make it? Captain gets up to the bridge. He gets the update. The situation is dire, and everyone dons their life jackets. The captain orders that women and children first to the lifeboats. Flares are sent up, and Richard gets to work helping families get to these lifeboats. Now, Giff talks to Annette and asks if she will give the news to his family back home that he is okay, because she's going to get there before he does. And in the face of disaster, Julia and Richard, they finally reconcile and have a tearful farewell as she and the children head to the boats. And you know what? The film's not over. I don't want to give much more away. There's still about 20 minutes left to the film, and a lot still happens. A lot of character resolution stuff, but I'm not going to give away the ending. I like the twists and turns, and it's a very entertaining story, so you should really check this one out for yourself. No spoilers, except for the one you already know about. So let me wrap up with some closing thoughts. Titanic was released in 1953. It was directed by Gene Negulesco and produced by Charles Brackett, and it was distributed by 20th Century Fox. They also produced the 1997 Titanic film. Now, of course, the film is based on the infamous story of the sinking of the White Star Line's RMS Titanic. You all know the story. It's on its maiden voyage from Southampton, England to New York City. On the way, the ship hits an iceberg near Newfoundland shortly before midnight on April 14th, 1912, and the ship sank within 3 hours. The Titanic was one of the largest ocean liners of its time and was considered unsinkable. Over 1,500 people, including most of the crew and steerage passengers, died when the Titanic sank, with an inadequate number of lifeboats, and even some of the lifeboats were only partially filled with people. The survivors were eventually rescued by the Carpathia, a British passenger liner. And of course, the sinking of the Titanic, the story was major news of the 20th century, and it's a historical subject that continues to fascinate the public to this day. I mean, honestly, I could have filled this entire video with Titanic trivia, but I got to stay on course here. So regarding the production, Walter Reich, one of the writers, said he came up with the Titanic movie idea and pitched the idea of actor Clifton Webb as one of the 25 multimillionaires who happened to be on board the ship. He said the film would be, quote, 60% truth, completely documentary, unquote, and would draw on real-life accounts. Now, I would have to say, I think they did a really good job with the authenticity, the look and feel of the grand staircase, the fancy dining room, the deck scenes, the boiler room, and all of those little details. And yes, obviously, it's got some dated special effects for the ship, but I still liked it. For 1952, I thought it looked good and it was convincing enough. The 20-foot ship model that they used for this film, I thought was convincing. And it's currently displayed at the Marine Museum of Fall River in Fall River, Massachusetts. The working title of the film was Nearer, My God, to Thee, which if you watch to the end of the film, you'll understand why. Passenger List was also another working title. And although the Sturgis family of this movie was completely fictional, there were quite a few characters based on real people in the movie. You had Captain Edward Smith, Mr. and Mrs. John Jacob Astor, Benjamin Guggenheim, and Mr. and Mrs. Strauss. Now, while they didn't have the unsinkable Molly Brown in the film, they did have a very similar character, Maud Young, as the wealthy socialite, who was very much alike. I don't know why they made that change, but from what I've read, it might have been related to a dispute over rights with her surviving family members. Who knows? In any case, actress Thelma Ritter really did a great job in her role as Maud, and I liked her sassy scenes playing cards with Richard in the film. During the filming, the actors playing characters escaping in lifeboats dangled in these prop lifeboats nearly 50 foot above an outdoor tank on the Fox studio lot. Barbara Stanwyck was very emotional during the scene, with the water below her, and seeing people on the ship, people who would be losing their lives on the sinking ship. That was all too real for her, and she burst into tears and couldn't stop sobbing. So here's some of my general thoughts on the film. There was a slow build-up with character development, maybe a little heavy on the melodrama in the early part of the film, until the iceberg action really gets going, with the film taking about an hour before the actual disaster strikes. And while the first part of the film can feel a little tedious, once we get the character stories developed, then they really come to life once the iceberg strikes. There were some really good side stories as well. I might have liked to see more of Richard Basehart's side story developed a little more, but there was a lot going on in the movie, so I get it. And while the marital drama of the characters Richard and Julia and their bickering does get a little tiring, it's one of those things that you watch it, and while it's happening, you think, okay, this is how it is while it's smooth sailing, so to speak. I wonder what happens once the ship inevitably strikes the iceberg. Then what will happen to these characters in their relationship? Will that be the catalyst to bring about positive changes, or will it just be the end? Well, I like that part of the film, and I won't give away the ending, but I do like how you see character changes once the iceberg finally shows up. When the Titanic hits the iceberg, and the women and the children are sent away to the lifeboats, I thought that this film did a really good job in presenting that genuine sense of doom for these men remaining on board. These men are on the boat, and they're all about women and children first. And they're serious, they get to work, they do all that they can to make sure that the lifeboats are safely away. And they do it nobly and bravely. And the orchestra continues to play through the night as this mighty ship sinks. Clifton Webb was really perfect here as the character of Richard Sturgis, basically this uptight, controlling, snob of a character. And you fully understand why Barbara Stanwyck's character Julia just wants to get away from this guy and his controlling grasp. Their problematic relationship is really the main focus of the first half of the film. And we really don't feel a lot of sympathy for Richard. More than a few times, I'm watching him and I'm thinking, what a jerk. But like I said, when the iceberg arrives, everything really changes and resolves well. It was also really interesting to see a young Robert Wagner in the film. And his college-age character seemed likable enough in the film. It was actually kind of fun to watch him. And I liked his scenes of faithfully pursuing Audrey Dalton's very sweet character, Annette. You know, I like a nice wholesome romance taking place, even if it is on board a doomed boat. I think this might actually be the first film I've ever reviewed on my channel with Robert Wagner. I know him from a handful of shows, namely things like Heart to Heart. Remember that one? And even more recently in NCIS. I'll be frank, I wasn't a big fan of Titanic 97, but I'll just leave it at that. Look, if you like the film, great. It's one of my wife's favorite films. It just didn't do much for me, although I did like James Horner's music for the film. Now, apparently in terms of Titanic films, there have been quite a few, but the British film A Night to Remember from 1958 is one that I have been reading about as being highly regarded in terms of staying very close in accuracy to the facts of the Titanic disaster and of portraying many of the actual historical figures involved. So I'm planning on doing that as a future review, so stay tuned. Anyhow, let me wrap things up. Titanic was an entertaining 1953 movie about the tragic maiden voyage of the Titanic. Barbara Stanwyck and Clifton Webb were both excellent as a couple struggling with marital issues in the face of this disaster. It was a well-told story with excellent set design and effects, and I thought it was really good for a film from 70 years ago in terms of telling a good, believable story about the Titanic disaster. It's definitely an excellent film, and it's one worth checking out. All right, so you're still here. So I've been to a few Titanic museums over the years. My wife and I have been to the Titanic Artifact exhibit in Orlando, as well as the amazing Titanic Museum in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee. And I love these places. I'm a big nut for museums. And it was just great to see the remnants of the past and getting an idea of what it would have been like. The museum in Pigeon Forge, the building is designed to look like the Titanic ship, and it's quite a sight to see as you're driving down that main drive in Pigeon Forge. So in thinking about it, one of my many various goofy bucket list ideas is that I think someday it would be great when my hair finally goes completely white to play the captain at one of these Titanic museums, either in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee or Branson, Missouri. So I thought, why not? I'm going to put together a little video that will advertise myself as a potential candidate someday to play the captain. So I made this high quality costume, and here, for your amusement, is my audition video for that job of the captain. Here we go. Welcome to the Titanic. I am your captain, Captain Edward Smith. Yes, I was there on that infamous night when the Titanic struck the iceberg. And try as I might, I could not steer the ship clear in time, and the ice struck the ship